Well, Max, welcome. Thank you very much to attend and talk to us. Max Mühlhäuser is professor in TU Darmstadt, the Technological University of Darmstadt. To whom doesn't know Darmstadt should know. It's one of the best universities in Europe. And he is leader or head of several international projects, including several projects with the industry. This is very nice. And he'll talk about security and trust to us, that human influence in security is very strong, something very important. And so Max, thank you very much to talk to us.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction and for the privilege to talk to you. By the way, I'll have a bit more information on the slides than I will present today. I'll leave it on the slides because it's recorded, and then you'll have a bit more material if you go through the talk again and can read some of the content. Okay, part one, what's the relationship between security and trust? If we look at an example like here on the bottom, we see on the left a person who is doing some telebanking. So accessing the bank's server on the right through the internet with maybe a smartphone. And we see that that person is using a browser, and we see this very famous lock here, the green lock. And the green lock should indicate you are using HTTPS, everything is fine, you are secure. We are doing cybersecurity of the finest here, everything is fine. So this is a binary view on security. Either you get the lock, everything is secure, or you don't get a lock and nothing is secure. But security, alas, is not binary. What are the things that can go wrong despite this lock? I'll give you a few examples. For instance, the TLS version on the left and on the right might be different. That was the reason for a very well-known attack that was very successful in the past. It may be that your attacker is very strong, so you should make sure that what you do with the HTTPS does not interest the NSA, for instance. Your client might not be secure. There might be a keystroke locker or any malware on your client that interferes with what you are doing. There might be implementation flaws. The heartbeat virus is one example where the programmers were not paying enough attention, and that made, despite the fact that TLS versions, the newest versions, are proven to be secure, nevertheless, there was a flaw in the implementation. And then there are, of course, certification authorities that are more or less credible, and some are known to have issued false certificates in the past. Plus, on the server side, there are also a couple of things that can go wrong despite HTTPS. And then in the end, of course, the question is, how much do you trust that service, that bank? And what about unknown services that you would love to use because they look very interesting, but you don't know them? We'll not talk about number 7 and 8 today, but about the other problems, not about these specific problems, but about the fact that in something that we consider secure, we have a lot of trust. You know, trust that procedures are well applied, trust that the programmers do the right thing, trust that the organizations do the right thing. So we need a lot of trust in addition to this binary security. So in the malicious world, like in the malicious cyber world, we have established a field where we can feel secure, and IT security, cyber security is trying to do that. But with my slide before, I think you have realized that this security has lots of anchors into a less secure world where we can only establish trust. So there's trust into organizations, programmers, people of other kinds, processes, services, and so on. So security is anchored in trust, and it is therefore important to understand how much we can trust these entities that we see here on that picture. So the grand challenge is, on one hand, to increase that gray bubble in the middle to make things more secure, but at the same time to understand that there is no 100% security. We need trust, and we have to find ways to assess the trustworthiness of those parties that on which the security depends. By the way, a lot of this can also be rooted in social trust, but that goes too far. It's just a side mention here on this slide. Well, you might say, well, there is a lot of trust in the context of security, like the blue line here on the left. There's trusted computing, trusted systems, trust management, and so on. But that is not trust in the way we need it, in the way we look at it as humans. But trusted computing, for instance, is a very secure hardware. Trusted systems are secure and dependable. Trust management means identity management and access control and these things. So they are all depending on security mechanisms. So they're all part of security, not of the kind of trust that we are interested in. Therefore, I call the trust that we are interested in soft trust sometimes, and especially computational trust, because we have to deal with it in the cyber world, and we have to learn how to do that. There were past approaches already. Things have been tried out. One thing which you all know is rating platforms and recommendation systems. So if you do a rating of your lunch at a bistro, a restaurant, or a hotel, or you do a rating of your doctor or whatever, there are platforms in commercial use. However, the models they use have many flaws and are overly simplistic, so we cannot use these things. There were other approaches in the past I cannot go through for time reasons, but they also don't suit very well our purpose. Therefore, I will concentrate in this talk on probabilistic modeling of trust, and I will call that computational trust in the proper sense for the rest of this talk. So this concludes part one. I should mention that all these approaches can, of course, benefit from machine learning, but machine learning is no additional concept, but it may augment and help in the concepts that I have mentioned. Okay, now, before we can understand how trust can serve security, we have to understand what trust really is and how we can model it in a computer. What is trust? Let's take an example. The person on the left wants to have a tax consultant because he has to do the tax declaration, and so he wants to rely on that person, an expert, to fill in the tax forms and submit the tax declaration. So the person on the left is depending on the person on the right if he would engage. So he's seeking whether or not to do that, and this is related to trust. There are different definitions of trust, and the first one, public, puts an emphasis on this fact that we have to rely on someone if we trust, or that's our disposition to rely. Gambetta's definition looks at the fact that trust is not binary as security is, but probabilistic. We will never trust someone 100% in all kinds. We will always have a relative trust. And if that relative trust is high enough, then we engage. Then we select that person and work with them. So if, for instance, you ask me to borrow you $10, I will quickly assess what is in stake, what's the risk, how do I assess the probability that I will get back my $10. Well, $10 are maybe not so much, so I will maybe do that. I'll have a different trust assessment if you ask me to borrow you $1,000. And how do I assess that? Obviously, I look at you, maybe I look up experience from the past. Did I already borrow you something in the past? Do I know someone who borrowed you something? So there is evidence on which I base my trust. And from that, I have an expectation I will get back my money. Or in this case here, I will get a good tax declaration, and then I engage. So there's always something at stake, like my $10 or $1,000. or like my tax declaration on which my payback or my tax depends. Okay, therefore, we define trust as the justified willingness to engage with an entity that may be a person or a piece of software or an organization in the presence of risk, because something is at stake. Willingness to engage means that first I need trust, then I make a decision to engage. So the trust comes first, and then I do something. Justified means that my trust, my probabilistic trust, does not fall from heaven. It is based on evidence. Okay. And if my expectation is high enough that I will be satisfied with the outcome, then I engage. Okay, so now we know what trust is in the real world to a certain extent. And if we add a few terms like the truster, the one who trusts, and the trustee, the one who is trusted, and the engagement that I've talked about, and the risk, then all the red terms here are the basic elements of what we want to model. And evidence is really very important. So we'll see a little more about model is trying to capture what I just said. We have trustees, whether or not we will engage. For that, we need evidence, and there's basically one is experience, my own past experience with that person, with that service, with that organization, or reputation, which is the experience of others. And then there are indicators like stereotypes. In the text example, it may be that you know, this company exists for 20 years, so I think old companies have proven that they are good, so I take rather a company that is years than a new company. The credentials, she may have a diploma of sorts, and so on and so on. All this goes into trust computation and leads to a trust score, which is my probabilistic value. And that is, of course, dependent on the stake and other contexts. So it's different. I trust in that tax consultant is different, whether it's about you know, filling in my tax form, or when she asked me to borrow her my car, then the trust might be totally different. So trust is not general for one entity. It is dependent on the context and the category that we are talking about. And based on this and on risk and benefit analysis, I make a subjective decision, because my trust might be different from yours, and I decide to engage or not. Okay, so we got closer to the model. And what we really need to focus on is trust computation, a system that has a sound, mathematical, good trust scores. And we'll for a while concentrate on how we input evidences into this model. Back to the picture from before, we have the expectation, which is before the fact. But once we have engaged, of course, we'll have a next experience, because I ask you to do my tax declaration, you do it, I look at it, I get some tax back, or I have to pay more than ever. That will make me satisfied or dissatisfied. Okay. By the way, this expectation is not the trustworthiness. What I personally think about the trustworthiness is something different. I do not sit in that person and know everything she is thinking and doing and knowing. That can never be the case. So I can only estimate the trustworthiness. Okay, own experience, as I said, might be the past years. I might also ask for positive and negative experience from the past, and this is the major source of evidence. And in addition, there are indicators, as I said, this being an old company and so on. The recommenders are usually not my real friends. They might be distributed around the world. I may not know them very well, but there might be more than in the physical world. And the indicators are a bit different. So there are subtle differences, but in essence, the picture is the very same for computational trust in the digital world. Now, this positive and negative experience can be modeled in a Bayesian way. And the Bayesian distribution then depends on this experience, more precisely on two values, alpha and beta. And they are calculated not only with the positive and negative experience, but also with an initial value, which represents my personal disposition to trust or to not trust. I might be a person who trusts almost everyone all the time, who's very likely to trust. I might be very cautious, very mistrusting. Then these values R0 and S0 will be different. We call that the prior knowledge. And depending on this alpha, which is basically the positive and negative experience, plus my disposition, positive or negative, will lead to a distribution function. And here in this example here, we see, for instance, the distribution function for alpha 11 and beta 4, and that's this curve here. And if those two values are the same, then we say this is a non-informative prior. My inclination to trust or not to trust is equal. I don't want to, to input my personal preferences in this. I want to be neutral with respect to trusting. Then we make the same number. If it's larger than these numbers, if they are larger, then their influence on the overall distribution is larger. Okay, now what we actually seek is the expectation value, and that is basically here the peak of that curve. Okay. By the way, the question of how slim or how broad this curve is gives us an indication of how certain we are with our expectation value. If the curve is very broad, then we might still have an expectation value that gives us a trust score, but we might be pretty wrong, so that's our certainty is very low. We'll get back to that in a moment. Well, modeling this has been first done by a famous colleague, Audun Yoshang from Oslo University. He applied subjective logic. I'll leave these slides just for your reference, but I'll not talk in detail. The point is that he has values that are very hard to convey to a user. For instance, uncertainty as in the fact that belief and disbelief and uncertainty have to add up to 1. That's very hard to explain to a user, but it's a very nice model. But here, look again, also a nice drawing which helps you to compute the trust value, but it's not easy to understand. So it's very hard to convey this to a user. Now, what we have done is we have gotten closer to Bayesian probabilities. Now, our model consists of the average rating, which represents just nothing but the positive and negative experience. Our initial trust, that's my disposition, and the certainty. And you can see this here in a diagram. Here we have, oops, sorry. Here we have